No longer defeated, I confess God has completed a change in me. The cycle has been broken.
Hello, my name is Wanda Boone, and the name of this show is Woman2Woman. You can follow us on Facebook, Woman2Woman. Just search for that page. I'm excited about this show because as women, we need other women to talk to. We need to understand the Word of God as it pertains to women and to know exactly what God's plan is for women. So this program is not only faith-based, but we'll also talk about some things that have to do with health and wellness also. You know, I recently heard a statistic that was very startling. And the statistic talked about stress and how stress is a factor that really is destroying the health of women today. Sustained chronic stress can lead to chronic health challenges. And so we have to be mindful. I recently posted on Woman2Woman Facebook page something that I hear as I travel around the United States on an airplane, and I'm sure you've heard it as well. As the attendants are giving instructions about safety, they talk about where the exits are and to be mindful of where the exits are, but they also say that if the cabin loses pressure and the oxygen mask falls from the certain location, if you are with a young child or someone that needs assistance, that you are to put the mask on your own face first before assisting others. And that became very profound to me because I started to think about how women are pulled in so many directions, and those directions may cause stress. We think that we don't have enough to do everything that we have to do in this life, and so it becomes rather a challenge. So when we think about who to take care of first, usually it's not ourselves, it's others. We're made that way. And so I want to talk to you about what it means in the Word of God to be a woman and how to prioritize according to the Word of God. You know, one of the things that I find so endearing about Jesus is how he felt about women. And it's just remarkable and it's lovely. And we'll talk about some of those examples that we have in the Word of God. One that comes to mind right now is the woman at the well and how Jesus drew her into a conversation that ultimately set her free. And that's how he is. He draws us in lovingly and tenderly, and then talks to us about areas that we may need to change. I also would like to let you know about some books that I've written. Some of the material I will go over with you. And the first one has to do with a subject that we don't talk very much about. And I think I will say a little bit about this today. The name of this book is Until We Meet Again. It's a very small book, and really, when I wrote it, I wasn't looking for a way to talk about this subject because it's not something that's very comfortable. So this little book is for those of us who have suffered miscarriage or have had a child to die early, or even for those who have had abortions, because there really is hope after those situations. I actually have had several miscarriages and resolved that within myself and with the Lord. So I wasn't angry with him. I didn't feel that it was his fault that I lost my babies. But something quite miraculous happened, and that's what I want to share with you today. And this is a poem that I wrote for one of my children. Where did you go when you escaped from me, my tiny bird set free in flight? Would you ever know, could you ever understand that you were to be my darling, my delight? And, you know, as I read those words from so long ago, I just remember that I wanted my children who had passed away in miscarriage before they had the opportunity to even draw one breath. I wanted them to know that I loved them, and somehow I wanted them to know that I wanted them, and you know, that I expected them to be mine for a lifetime. So miscarriage sounds like a mistake or a mishap, and abortion sounds just too cruel. You know, women who have had abortions and miscarriage suffer in silence. There's no funeral. There are usually no condolence cards. It's expected that you just come back from that fully whole as if nothing ever happened. You're fully whole, but there is a hole where that precious little one was. So even though we did not have an opportunity to hold our babies, they nevertheless were alive in us. So what this book talks about is a supernatural experience that can only be described as a miracle. I actually, to be honest with you, I was pregnant in my fallopian tube for almost 3 months. I was a medical miracle. And when I went into the hospital for emergency surgery, at first they didn't know where the baby was. They thought it was outside of my womb, but from the ultrasound they weren't really able to see exactly where it was. So what happened was that I had the operation, and my fallopian tube was removed along with the baby that was almost 3 months inside. Of course, my fallopian tube had ruptured. So, you know, I was fine after that, and my husband was sitting there after the surgery, and I remember, you know, talking to him, and then a little while later he had to leave, and when he left, the nurse sat me up, and I began to bleed from the incision, and the doctors were called in. And they told me that I had to go back into surgery because a blood vessel, they forgot to tie off an artery. And I said, well, I don't want to go back into surgery, so whatever you need to do, you can do it here while I'm laying on this bed. So I lay there and I watched everything that happened. I won't go into those details because it might be a little too gruesome, but you can imagine. I was told that over 2/3 of the blood that was in my body, I had lost it during that whole ordeal. Well, what else happened during that ordeal was that I actually died. I remember feeling like I was going to see Jesus, and I was so excited because I loved him so much. And it wasn't a frightening feeling. It was very comforting that I was going to see him. I remember seeing a bright light. I remember getting to where he was. I remember seeing him. and he put one hand on his hip, and I was so excited to see him, and so I was smiling. I was getting ready to say, Jesus, and he had one hand on his hip, and he said, Wanda, what are you doing here before your time? You have to go back. And I remember the sense of sadness that I couldn't be with him, and then I found myself back in my body. So, I came home from the hospital. I didn't share that experience with anyone except my husband at the time, because people would have thought that I was insane. And so shortly after that, by this time I had had 2 miscarriages, and I really didn't question why. I just knew that that was something that I would ask about when I got to heaven. However, I was laying in my bed and not in a particularly spiritual state at all, but I remember that I was lying on my back and the ceiling opened up, the sky opened up, and I watched as I saw 2 small children. Now, this time I didn't know what I was watching, but there were 2 small children on the riverbank. One was lively and one was kind of quiet, and so they were just playing by the riverbank, and I just remember thinking they were so cute. And then they walked up the riverbank, and at the end of a particular place, I saw the knees, someone from the knees down, and the children were skipping and jumping all the way over there, and then they jumped up and were scooped up on this person's knees. And I just remember thinking, oh, how cute those little children were. And then they said, they looked at me, looked down at me, and they said, "We love you, Mommy. We love you, Mommy." And then the voice that I recognized as being Jesus said, "I love you, Wanda." And then the 2 little children jumped down from his knees, ran back down the riverbank, and said, "We have to go now. We love you, Mommy. We have to go now." And instantly, I saw a multitude of people, too numerous to count, saying to me, "We love you, Wanda." And it was almost as if I knew that they were going to care for those babies. Now, I didn't ask to see that. I didn't necessarily want to see that. I didn't need a reason. But I believe that I saw that vision for you. I saw it for you because you may have guilt. What could you have done to prevent the death of that child? What could you have done to reverse the decision to have an abortion? The good news that I have for you today is that whether your baby was lost in abortion or lost in miscarriage or lost in sudden infant death syndrome or lost in an accident or lost in any other kind of way, that your baby is safe in heaven with the Lord.